Okay, welcome to the Trends in Biotech session. My name is Chris McAndrew. I am a partner in the Patent and Innovation Group at Wilson Sonsini. And I've been practicing law for about 15 years now. We're privileged and honored to be a sponsor of this session. And my role here is basically to introduce Jerry Lee, a partner at Goldman Sachs, who will be introducing the panel momentarily, which I will also be joining, apparently, I was just told. So Vlad, unfortunately, isn't able to make it, so I'll be filling in his seat. But without further ado, Jerry Lee from Goldman Sachs.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I think we have a really exciting set of panelists with, I think, really important and timely perspectives on what's happening in biotech and pharma. As Chris mentioned, my name is Jerry Lee. I'm with Goldman Sachs. I'm the partner heading up our biopharma business. I think for many of you in the room, as I think about the Yale Innovation Summit, looking at the panels that you have, actually, I'd love to see a show of hands. Who in the room is like a practitioner or an operator in life sciences or biotech? Okay, very good. Who in the room is more on perhaps the research side, either academic or otherwise? Obviously, some of our panelists. Are there students in the room as well? Okay, super helpful. So it just helps me kind of craft some of our questions for today. But again, very excited to have this chance to chat with you guys about what we see as important trends in both biotech and pharma. I think we all agree, both on the panel, as well as, of course, based on the fact that you're here at Yale Innovation Day. We're sitting at a very special time, I think, in the world, in the US and in New Haven, around biotech, around innovation, around medicine, around real innovation. And so I think many of us feel very lucky to be participants in this ecosystem, again, both globally in America and specifically in Connecticut and New Haven. When you think about even Yale and its position in this realm, I think it's only increased and dramatically accelerated over time. So congrats to our Yale Innovation Summit team led by Josh Morag and others. What I might do is just quickly introduce our panelists. And I'm incredibly amazed as to how quickly we actually updated the screen here. To my left is John Houston, CEO of Arvinas, literally right down the street, public biotech company. John and I have been working together for years, heading to that IPO and afterwards. Kareen, to his left, who heads up the site, the Connecticut site for research at Boehringer Ingelheim, that's in Reachville, Connecticut. To her left is Sang, who heads up R&D at Alexion, an AstraZeneca company. That's, of course, also down the street. And then Chris, of course, who just introduced me, I'll now introduce him. He's a head patent attorney at Wilson Sonsini and a co-sponsor of this event. Thank you, Chris. What I might do is ask each of our panelists in a minute or two just to provide a little bit more of their background, both with respect to their role as well as kind of their connection to New Haven. John Houston?
Thanks, Jerry. I'll have to apologize right from the beginning. I woke up this morning and I had no voice whatsoever. And I met Jerry for coffee and he thought I was joking. But yeah, hopefully I'll get through the hour. Normally my accent is a hindrance, but this time it's going to be my actual voice. Yeah, so I'm the CEO of Arvinas. I've been there for over 7.5 years now, taking the company from a private preclinical company to where it is today, where we have hopefully pivotal data coming out in our lead compound at the end of this year, on the cusp of being a commercial company. And some really significant growth in terms of employees. When I joined the company, I was employee number 40, and we have around about 450 people now. So really good growth in the company. It's a very exciting company. It's using protein degradation as its platform. This was a company that was founded by Professor Craig Cruz of Yale University. And all my interactions with Craig when I joined the company were fabulous. Great energy and excitement about the potential of the platform. And it's fabulous to see that coming to fruition now in our various programs. Prior to joining Arvinas, I was at BMS for 19 years here in Connecticut. And then prior to that, 10 years at Glaxo in the UK.
Thank you, John. Kareen?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Hi, I'm Karine Bustani. I'm the research site head at Boehringer Ingelheim here in Richfield, about an hour away from here. And I'm also the global head of immunology and respiratory diseases research. I have to say I am thrilled to be part of this panel, and I'm particularly happy that we're having it here in Connecticut. So very much appreciated that the Yale Ventures have organized us as an ecosystem to come together in this summit. It's just wonderful to see, truly. So for those who don't know Boehringer, we are an independent company. We're not publicly traded, and our headquarters in the US are located in Richfield in Connecticut. We have a very large R&D team in Richfield working on a variety of diseases. Some are highly prevalent like cardiorenal and metabolic diseases, but also rare diseases in the autoimmune field and other, and respiratory and mental health, as well as retinal diseases. And really our mission is to discover therapies that will transform the lives of patients, but also animal. We have a large animal health organization. On to you.
Yes, hello. My name is Seng Chang, and I'm the head of research and product development in Alexion, which is a unit of AstraZeneca. It's the rare disease unit within the AstraZeneca family of companies. So I just recently joined Alexion just over 10 months ago, but prior to that, I was at Genzyme, Sanofi, and just prior to joining Alexion at Pfizer. So a majority of my career has actually been spent at developing solutions for patients with rare diseases, and I've had the good opportunity, privilege of actually being engaged in a small number of programs that actually led to the development and regulatory approval of some of these medicines that are being used in this rare disease patient community. So really, really happy and excited about that. It's working really well. So I joined Alexion, like I said, just 10 months ago. And as you know, Alexion is a company that's focused on developing solutions for patients with rare diseases. So my goal going forward is to obviously ideate, research, develop, and deliver what we hope would be transformational medicines for patients in this particular community. Our headquarters is actually in the Seaport area in Boston, and we do have a research facility in the Cambridge area that's centered around developing genomic-based medicines. It includes gene therapy and gene editing. But here in New Haven, we have over 650 research and development colleagues just located just a few minutes down the road. And my efforts here are obviously to leverage that experience that I've gained at the various organizations to continue to identify new solutions for yet more indications in rare diseases.
Thank you. So what I might do is we will each share some of our perspectives across the trends that we see as an executive, as researchers, as a lawyer in biotech and pharma. I might kick this off with a little bit of a macro perspective, just kind of set the table. And so I would say when you zoom back to 2023, it was a tough year in biotech in particular. We saw 11 IPOs in biotech across the entire year. Compare that versus prior years, we saw 70 plus biotech IPOs. And so it was a relatively challenging macro backdrop for biotech equities last year. I would highlight, we, especially Goldman Sachs, we had sold a number of companies throughout the course of the year that I think helped with some of our IPOs in Q1 of this year. And so throughout the course of spring, summer, and fall, we had sold a series of $10 and $15 billion companies in I&I, inflammation immunology. And I highlight this because Sang and Karine will talk a little bit later about key therapeutic areas. Rare disease, like a Friedreich's ataxia. Oncology, this is an ADC company we had sold. And then lastly, Christmas Eve, we had sold a company in schizophrenia. So my point is simply, M&A actually does feel like it has been there, but the equity side of the equation has been much more tepid, a little bit more fragile. People have used the word nuclear winter. Q1 of this year, in January, I think we as a community, we as effectively as an ecosystem, felt like inflation was relatively a known entity. We thought that while it wasn't in check, we knew what to expect. And therefore, globally, and especially in the US, we thought we'd start seeing rate cuts in March, followed by June, July, September, December. So we'd see a series of 4 or 5 rate cuts in the year of 2024. Okay, preceded again by 2025 rate cuts, totaling probably 8 rate cuts overall, bringing our overall kind of terminal Fed funds rate down to something like 3.25, 3.5. That is no longer the case. And so over the course of the last couple of months, what's happened is March came and went. Now the view is June is not going to happen. July is not going to happen. September is now less than 50% likely to happen. December is barely 50% likely to happen. So where are we today? Versus January, where we thought we'd see 4 or 5 rate cuts this year, we are now expecting 1.25 rate cuts overall this year. We still expect to see 8 rate cuts overall, just everything's being pushed back out. Why is this relevant to biotech? Biotech, as you can imagine, is a very long live set of assets, right? So John and I started working on Arvinas years ago, right? And so your preclinical, your clinical, your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 takes many, many years to actually get into patients, to actually solve these unmet needs. And so because of that time period, there's a lot of discounting that occurs when investors buy into either your private equity or your public equity. And so that's why the cost of capital really matters. It matters in tech and it matters in biotech. And so in many ways, inflation read through to rate cuts is effectively almost like a mirror image of the biotech index, which is called the XBI. And so this year, we saw the XBI finally pop back up above 100. That was at the end of February. Then inflation, kind of peaked its ugly head. And then over the course of 5 or 6 weeks, we had a full correction in biotech, meaning full down 20% just in those 6 weeks. And so needless to say, it's been a very challenging time. We've seen 7 IPOs in Q1 of this quarter. So it was actually very helpful. We saw 7 IPOs versus 11 all of last year. That being said, only 1 is above water, meaning only 1 is trading above, this is one of our IPOs, trading above where we issued that IPO. So it's a challenging time. Q2, we've only seen 1 IPO, period. So I think big picture, it's a challenging macro backdrop that is fed through to the XBI, that is fed through to IPO flows. But what I think all of us would agree is the innovation is real. And so as we await for the macro to recover, we and you continue to be focused in the lab on patients, and we do think this too shall pass. So that's kind of the big picture backdrop. John, what types of trends would you like to highlight in biotech and pharma?
Well, I mean, that has been a significant one for us as we map out when to raise money, when to get investors excited about their data. Clearly, that macro environment has had a kind of a heavy anchor on companies like Arvinas and many others. Arvinas has been in a very good position because we have had data that has allowed us to go out and raise cash when we needed to. We've also been able to get deals done that's brought in cash. So we feel as though we've been in a very good position over the last few years as we went through COVID, as the stock market really showed an aversion, if you will, to investing in biotech. We actually got through that relatively strongly. But overall, it'd be great if we got to the point where the winter was over. I did think for a while during January, February, that maybe we're seeing the first green shoots of that recovery, but it get crushed out pretty quickly. And I think for further investment, for the biotech community to grow here in New Haven and elsewhere, I do think that macro environment has to change significantly. Having said that, I think good data, good ideas, good concepts still get funded. We see examples of that all the time. So I believe that Connecticut, New Haven in particular, still has a huge opportunity to have companies set up here, to get funding that will get them to the data points that are inflection points. And I think that will continue. And it just has to be encouraged. People should not be put off by the fact that there's a tougher environment. We've actually seen this in the past before. There has been times where it's been tough to get investment in biotech, and we got through it. So I would certainly hope that trend continues of biotechs coming out of Yale and other schools here in Connecticut being set up, innovation being rewarded. That should continue, and I don't see a reason why it shouldn't.
Thanks, John. Green?
I want to build on what John said around the great ideas, because I do have to say, despite the fact that the macro environment may not be favorable, we see a lot of great ideas and we see very exciting trends in scientific innovation. For example, in the field of immunology that I watch very closely, I'm very excited to see that we are now applying novel modalities that had been historically more reserved for the field of oncologies, towards curing or treating autoimmune diseases, right? Diseases that in the past we had been very, very limited with, just certain antibodies and others. So we're seeing, for example, the antibody drug conjugates being applied to that. There was recent CAR T data, very exciting CAR T data showing some potential resetting of the immune system there. So a lot of excitement around applying novel modalities into fields where we hadn't seen that previously in the past. The other part I would say is that there's a lot of excitement in the cardiometabolic field. Obesity now is a very hot topic. And why? Because we are seeing some efficacy data, right? I mean, for the longest time, we had no treatment for those patients for one of the greatest risk factors, actually, for mortality and for cardiovascular diseases. And now we're seeing efficacy with some of the new therapies, those peptides, and we're seeing consequently a boost in the scientific field to identify even better combinations of these peptides that enable a durable efficacy in those patients. So that's another very exciting field. I'm also seeing a trend where there's a little bit less investment, and I don't know, you can correct me if I'm mistaken here, in immuno-oncology and more again towards immunology, autoimmune, inflammatory diseases. I think that balances the field a little bit, so that's really good to see. And finally, what I would say is I'm seeing also the application of precision medicines in area where historically we haven't thought about precision medicine. And we saw a really good example of that in the field of COPD, where some therapies are now being tailored for specific patients that have specific biomarkers and enables us to get a better efficacy in those patients than otherwise we would have predicted. So this is all very exciting and going in the right direction. And I remain very hopeful, despite the macro environment, that these really good ideas we will be able to see through as an ecosystem.
Maybe just to address Green's good point for a brief moment, I'll pass it to Sang. So yes, if you actually think about the world in two halves, say the M&A side and then the investor side, on the M&A side, as you can imagine, sadly, cancer is cancer, and therefore the biggest area for M&A in the last 5 years has basically just been oncology. That being said, a close twin, surprising to most, is actually rare disease. Over the last 5 years, partly because of relatively chunky M&A, rare disease actually has been basically on par with oncology. What we've seen more recently, to your good point, is actually two other big focus areas for large cap pharma acquiring small and mid cap biotech. Number one is absolutely inflammation and immunology. I mentioned a deal that we did last year for a TYK2 TL1A type asset. And then number two is there's been a renaissance in CNS. And so CNS broadly writ, but especially psychiatry has been quite big. There were a number of deals right around Christmas in CNS. And so that's on the M&A side. These M&A cannot be separated from, of course, investing, because investing, there's always a view that perhaps the companies you invest in will be taken out. So in some ways, it's a map. When you think about IPOs or follow-ons, they actually tend to follow where maybe M&A and kind of the general zeitgeist is. And so that continues, of course, be oncology, especially ADCs. ADCs are very, very hot, so to speak, right now. Rare disease, sadly, is a little bit less in focus. I say sadly because it's a true unmet need, but it's sadly a little bit less in focus. I&I continues to be very, very big. And then we're actually seeing a lot of new co-formation and IPO prospects in CNS as well.
Yeah, and I would just say around the CNS, I think when I also brought the example of the precision medicine, we're also seeing precision medicine in CNS, which to me, this is a completely new territory, and that's very exciting because this is what the field needs.
Agreed. Sang, and then we'll come back to Chris.
Sure. I think in the context of trends, I see this as really quite kind of local. It depends on the context of where you are looking at, what you're trying to address. So, but what I think all of us do is to really follow the science, right? We're looking for events where there's clear breakthrough in our knowledge gaps. And this is illustrated, as just mentioned earlier, this causal relationship between GLP-1 and not only in diabetes, but also in weight management. And this, explosion in terms of a lot of organizations and looking for different ways by which you can intervene and contribute to this very, very large space. But in the context of rare diseases, as you mentioned, what we do look at is to primarily focus our efforts on areas where there's very high levels of unmet medical need. And you heard about a couple of those that Corinne mentioned. For us, is in two areas, clearly in the area of neurodegenerative diseases or neurological diseases that include rare neuromuscular diseases, a very big area for which there's a very high level as yet of unmet medical need. And the other is in cardiomyopathies, for example, for which, again, there is not only a positive treatments, but significant opportunity in terms of unmet medical need, but also commercial interests. I think in those areas, what we tend to do and what everyone's looking at in terms of a trend, if you want to call it, it's the use of AI in terms of looking for new novel drug targets in these areas, but also in general in facilitating a more rapid way by which you can do drug development. So those are the kind of principles that we're looking at in terms of areas. So these are areas where we have already built within our respective organizations depth and strength and knowledge as to how we can prosecute these programs. So that's one of the emphasis that we put in terms of where we go. The other thing that I think we're seeing, and again was mentioned by Corinne and Jerry, is in the context of looking at emerging technologies that we can marry to the areas that we are interested in prosecuting. So at Alexion, we are primarily looking at two very exciting technologies. One is broadly in the context of what we refer to as genomic medicines. That could be in the context of gene therapy using viral or non-viral vectors, as well as gene editing, in this case primarily using non-viral based approaches. And the reasons why we are particularly excited about these technologies is that it has the potential to offer a very, very durable outcome or benefit following a single administration that, as far as we know, based on current data is available in the clinic for multi-years. So you can even imagine that you can refer to these types of therapies as potentially curative for some of the subset of indications that are amenable to, in this instance, viral-based gene delivery. Another technology that we are particularly excited, and this is a trend, if you want to call it, because Corinne also mentioned it, and that's in the context of cell-based therapies, particularly in the context of CAR-Ts. And as you said, there was a lot of excitement and evidence of success in oncology. But also very recently, we and others have now seen evidence that it can be applied to rare autoimmune indications as well, rare and non-rare autoimmune indications. And if this is really truly successful, it also like gene therapy because of its ability to reset the immune system to be potentially curative. But today, the technology is in the context of autologous platform, which is unwieldy and difficult to scale and to provide broad access to this very important medicine. So that's something that we are looking at to try and embellish and solve in terms of how we can translate this really very powerful technology for patients, in our case, in rare autoimmune diseases. So those are the kind of thematic themes that we think about when we look at how to place our investments internally. Is really in the context of what we're trying to solve and what can we utilize that's breaking in the science, in the broad scientific community that we can leverage and marry to those disease indications that we want to address. And as always, because we are also in a very competitive environment, working in the same areas, what we like to do is obviously to look for therapies that are differentiated and superior to what may be already available or been thought of in the field. So if it's autologous today, let's really focus on the allogeneic approach to these issues. If you're looking at viral vectors, they are fine, as we understand them today, for a subset of genetic diseases. But if we're going to broaden the utility, we need to have significantly better gene delivery vector systems that address different tissue organs with much higher levels of potency. So that's really what we try to do.
Chris, obviously directly related not just to biotech, but also to R&D, is the patent framework. And so I think some of the hot topics recently have been certainly focused around, say, antibody development and how that overall framework has been evolving. Would you like to share some commentary?
Yeah, so my perspective is from, I represent smaller biotech and public companies, but we file patents for them and then, hopefully get patents that protect their products and other competing products. And one, as you guys all know, I think antibodies are taking over the drug world, basically. Maybe 10, 20 years ago was small molecules. but now it's antibodies and cell therapies, gene therapies, and the like. And I think it's sort of a negative in my mind, but the Patent Office and the Supreme Court in particular, there was a case, Amgen v. Sanofi, and then another case, Juno v. Kite, that commented on antibodies and the legal framework of what's called written description and enablement of a claim. Essentially, if your claim is really broad, like an antibody that binds epitope X or protein Y, which is rather broad, the Supreme Court and the Fed Circuit did not like that, whereas before, those claims were fine from a written description and enablement standpoint. This is sort of debatable, but arguably it has switched, the pendulum has gone to requiring a narrower claim that requires particular sequences of the antibody that are in the applications filed for patents. These sequences, I don't trust everybody understands antibodies fully, but there's certain regions of an antibody that are necessary to bind the target. And the Supreme Court and Fed Circuit essentially said those sequences need to be in your claim of your patent. Why does this matter? Patents exclude others, right? And if your patent has to have the exact sequence of an antibody in it, and who are you excluding? The only person your claim is covering, the only entity, is your product and not anybody else's, which is, a big part of the value of a patent is preventing generics and biosimilars at the right time. So it does offer that. But the trend is limiting the scope of claims and antibodies to just covering your product and generics and biosimilars. Some people, depends on who you are, but that can be very concerning because a lot of times you want to at least try to exclude your adjacent competitors making very similar products. For example, a competitor might make the same exact antibody with one different amino acid in that sequence. They're not going to fall within the scope of your patent and could directly compete with you. So it's quite concerning there. There's some good tips, and we've developed strategies of the firm to try to get the best broad claim to rebut these recent decisions by the courts, but it's still challenging. We also, I think it goes without saying, but have also seen a massive increase in the number of AI-related applications. Companies from development, discovery, even how to interact with FDA, using AI to say, how do I talk to person X at FDA? I mean, you name it, it's there, and we are seeing a huge tick of applications in that space as well. So it's a fun and challenging world. And then lastly, I think the other biggest change, which is, I'll end on a positive note, many of you may have heard of the myriad decisions and computers and natural products, and how the court said you can't patent DNA or mRNA and things like that. This ultimately ended up being a challenge for diagnostic companies for a period of time. But since those decisions, the Patent Office and other courts have greatly limited how narrow or how broad those decisions were considered. And I think the pendulum swung back. So there's been a kind of a revolution of diagnostic companies and the ability to get valuable patents for those folks, even despite those earlier decisions. So.
Thank you, Chris. John, there are obviously, based on the hand raised, a lot of entrepreneurs and operators in the audience in life sciences. As you mentioned, as I highlighted in your background, you've taken Arvinas from pre-IPO through multiple financings and multiple transformational partnerships, raising over $2 billion of capital overall for Arvinas. So huge success for you and your team and Craig Cruz and kind of the Yale science factory, so to speak. When you look at this audience and you think about kind of the trials and tribulations of that adventure, what counsel would you provide this audience in terms of both navigating, say, the roller coaster that is the XBI, the roller coaster that is running a public company, but also kind of the right partnerships to do to really create value both for your shareholders as well as the large cap pharma, in the end, doing the best for patients? John?
Yeah, great question. So when I joined Arvinas straight from Bristol Myers Squibb, I remember talking to Craig and Tim Shannon, and actually John Soderstrom, who's in the audience, about what I needed to do as I joined as the CSO initially, and then I became the CEO pretty rapidly after that. What did I need to do? And it was all about, you need to raise cash. And I said, okay, that sounds interesting. How much cash do we have? We've got about a year. So my naivety really helped me and protected me. I had no idea that a year's worth of cash wasn't a lot. And so I entered into this new role, new job, full of enthusiasm, knowing that this technology was so fabulous that people would just give us money. Now, after several months, I realized people had to be persuaded a little bit more than that. And so we had really pushing on big pharma companies to say this is an exciting platform. Protein degradation in those years we were the only company in the space. We had to convince people that it was a viable platform. But by the end of the year, Genentech and Pfizer had signed up in deals. And then we rolled into a Series C, which brought in more money. People were so incredibly enthusiastic about the Series C, we rolled right into an IPO. So by the end of my second year, I thought, well, that was actually pretty easy.
There are a couple of steps in between.
A couple of steps in between. What helped there was clearly an exciting platform. People who really were excited about the potential of it. And an environment and investment that was keen to put money into innovation and into platforms. Today, I think is tougher. I don't think platform companies have the same leverage that they did. Investors, when they look at companies, they want to have clinical data. They will say to companies, come back when you have clinical data. And these poor companies are saying, well, we're talking to you because we need money to get into the clinic. So there's a real dichotomy there in terms of trying to get companies past these different transition points. But I still am a great believer that data that you have that is breakthrough data, be a platform or a particular asset, money will come your way. But it's a tougher environment than it was just 6, 7 years ago. But I think everyone should still focus on the fact that it's an exciting thing to do. I would never say don't do this. I think innovative ideas combined with investors who have vision really create something special. And I think New Haven, Connecticut has a great opportunity to continue that. We do have the substrate here. We've got really bright scientists. We do have a core base of investors, even in the Connecticut community, that do significant amount of investment. And I think that does draw in a lot of interest. So my view is that we'll get through these few years that are coming up. I think we'll get back to a basis where people will fully recognize innovation, and we'll see the funding and the biotech community to grow. But my advice would always be to engage in the process. This is not something to be fearful of. If you've got an innovative idea, there will be people that want to invest in that idea. I truly believe that.
Let's actually stay on that thread, partly because it resonates with me. Obviously, we're a bank. We're based in New York, but I spent a lot of time in Connecticut. I've always asked myself, why are we not more? Why can't we be more like a Cambridge? Right. So Cambridge obviously has a fully integrated biotech ecosystem, from soup to nuts, from the innovation to the capital, to some of the large cap acquirers. And so, in many ways, and I'm a Yale. My wife and I went to Yale. I spent last weekend here for my 25th reunion. I've had like bar pizza 3 times in the last week.
He doesn't need pizza.
Well, there's always a debate like bar, Sally's Sundays, and modern. But my point is simply, I think, I'd love to stay on that thread. Karina, you're also involved with BioCT. Obviously, you've invested your career in Connecticut. You head up your site for BI. How do you think about, it's not just New Haven, but like Connecticut and its biotech ecosystem for BI and even more broadly writ for kind of everyone?
Yeah, I definitely think about it as an ecosystem favorable for innovation. I think we have everything that we need to drive innovation from within Connecticut. We have the venture funds, we have the large pharma, we have the small startups, the biotechs, and we have incredible academic centers, namely Yale and UConn and others. So we have all of the pieces. I think the key is to ensure that we're able to recruit grow and retain the talent within Connecticut. And that's something that we're putting a lot of efforts on. You know, anytime that any organization, whether it's your organization or Yale, etc., hires somebody, a talented individual, I think we all win as an ecosystem. We all win because we are nurturing this ecosystem. So we need to really hold hands as an entire ecosystem and figure out ways whereby collectively we can, recruit talent to the state. And that's part of one of BioCT's mission, the people. How do we really bring in the right people to the state and we keep them there? Beyond that, I think what we can also do as an organization is help each other out more. So for example, at Boehringer, just a couple of weeks ago, we had on-site in Richfield, we hosted what we call the office hours, where we come as a team, we bring together our experts to bring free advice to entrepreneurs, to startups, companies. They come and they visit us with their case studies, if you will, and we're there to really help them identify solutions for their problems and help them build their stories. And we do this pro bono. We don't charge at all for it. We're doing it for the greater good of the community because we believe that if we nurture innovation, it will come back to us at some point. So those are important things that we should be doing as an organization, and we are, I think, already doing. We were all here because we are committed to this ecosystem. No.
Stay on that, actually saying, I think Alexion has a special history in Connecticut, one of the original homegrown small and mid-cap biotechs. Obviously, it's now Comma, an AstraZeneca company, but you have a huge facility right down the street. Sam?
No, not much to add to what Corinne said. So I'm relatively new to this area, but I appreciate that Alexion historically has thought of this as a very vibrant community that we could invest and also grow. So, like I said, our Center of Research is actually located and centered here in New Haven, where we have over 600 colleagues or employees and residents. So for me, it's in the context of our ability, as we said, to actually find talent, and there's plenty in this system, and that's allowed us to feed and grow. That this organization over 3 years has tripled. So when I look back at how big the organization was in New Haven, today in the last 3 years we've literally tripled in terms of the number of people that we have in New Haven. And part of it is not only the ability to attract, but also the fact that there's a lot of crossover interactions with the local community, be it Yale or the other great academic institutions that we have in the state. So a third of our budget, in the research budget, is external innovation. So we're always looking for opportunities to invest in other great ideas, be it in incubators or small biotech companies, or you're just partnering with both companies of industry or with the academic institutions to develop new ideas to complement those that we have. So even though we have 600, we don't have the totality of all the great ideas in the world. And we always appreciate that it's very important that we are located in a region or a locale that allows us to begin to access that innovation and good ideas. So I guess for me, just being here not for very long, I think what we could do to potentially attract even more investment in this space is a greater availability of infrastructure. I think it's coming along, but I think it's still relatively limited in the local area. And I think we could do a little bit more in terms of promoting the virtues of this as a site. I mean, the cost of livings, that we're next to the ocean, the pizzas. I don't think we do a good job locally.
The pizza is really important.
Yeah.
Hey, we had an Arvinus pizza. So
Yeah.
Oh, this is great advertising, by the way. So, as I mentioned, I've been at the bar like 3 times last week. But they literally have an Arvinus pizza. John, would you like to enumerate the toppings of the Arvinus pizza?
it's got everything.
Yes.
If you're a vegetarian, it's not for you. But it's the money goes to charity. So it was just something we did with our staff a few years ago when we worked with Bar and came up with an Arvinus pizza. And it sells pretty well, apparently. So
and $2 of each pizza
goes to charity. Yeah.
So in some ways, I've donated $100 to charity.
You've donated. You've donated.
Is
a
it
lot.
tax deductible?
No.
That's a very good question.
You got to make a profit before you can be taxed. It's an interesting question about space, because when I got asked the question a few years ago, what was the things that were limiting biotech growth in Connecticut? It was space and infrastructure.
Sure.
and for companies to mature from being a small company to a bigger company. There was nowhere to go.
Yes.
And I think that has changed a lot over the last few years. We see 101 College Street going up, and that's going to be a fabulous building. I'm sure there's plans for other buildings. So there's more infrastructure than there was. There's more of a community of biotech here now as well. What Connecticut doesn't do, I don't think, is advertise itself. I mean, you see commercials for Cambridge and
Yes.
South San Francisco all the time, and even other regions of the US, but not Connecticut. Connecticut should be, even from the government level, really pushing the fact that there's something very special happening in Connecticut in terms of the growth of the biotech community. And the more we plan to do that as individual leaders and as a community, the better it will be for Connecticut. Because I think when you get people here, they like being here. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to bring up your family. And if we have enough biotech jobs here and other jobs, then you yourself plus your family can live and work in the space in the same way they can in other biotech communities. So I think we're on the cusp of that. I think COVID gave us a bit of a hit because companies hired people where they lived, right? So, even Irvinus, we hired quite a number of people. We now have people in 20 different states in America. Our head of regulatory is in London. We would have not done any of that if COVID hadn't hit. We'd have been still focused on Connecticut. So that's been a change, but the infrastructure growth also has been a positive change.
I totally agree. Seng and Corinne, I know you talked a little bit about therapeutic areas earlier. When you think about, obviously you're all multi-therapeutic area, multi-modality, multi-indication companies, and therefore research heads. But when you think about the future, when you think about skating to where the puck is, obviously you talked a little about even like obesity and kind of the dynamic nature as to how people think about unmet needs and markets. Even Goldman Sachs this morning, we kind of took up our perspectives on the overall anti-obesity market from just 100 billion to 130 billion. My point is simply, these are constantly moving pucks. How do you as research heads think about the future, Corinne?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we're very much focused on the patients. Where is the unmet need? Does the patient have unmet needs? And so it starts with the patients. And then what I look for is emerging science. Is there new science in this field that enables us to discover transformative therapies for the patients? We're not simply just looking for incremental benefit. We want to be first in class with therapies that will truly fulfill this unmet need. And so where we'd like to be is essentially at the intersection of both the unmet need and the emerging science. And that's when we really invest in those disease areas. And partnership, like you were mentioning earlier, Sang, is key to us also. We like to nurture the science in those areas. And I would say close to 50% of our portfolio is actually anchored on partnerships, whether it's academic or with other startup or even other large pharma companies. So it's essential for us to not just look at the science behind closed doors, but really open up to the environment around us and look for opportunities for exciting new science. And I would encourage every really entrepreneur here in the room, if you have a good idea, persist and don't get discouraged by the macro environment, because the world needs good ideas, and there's a lot of unmet need left in many, many diseases that we are in. And that's what excites us when we see the science to have a certain potential to potentially lead to a breakthrough treatment for the patient. That's where we want to be playing.
Seng?
Yeah, again, not really much to add to what Corinne said. So I think we tend to be very pragmatic in terms of how we approach this question. In rare diseases, there's 10,000 rare diseases. And as we probably know, solutions are really only available, but just for 5% of these 10,000 different diseases. So what we try to do is to be very focused on the key areas where we have strength and experience. And that also builds on the business that already made a good presence in. And we look at the probability of technical and regulatory success, PTRS. So we focus most of our efforts and investments in those programs where we feel has a good probability of actually translating into a real medicine for patients in the short and intermediate term. but we don't put most of all investments in only the late stage or you want to call it diseases where there's a lot of biology already. We also need to be at the leading edge for those diseases where there's high unmet need, very little investment, and maybe in some instances, very low commercial return on investment. But in rare disease, I think we have a special role to play in that most of the rare diseases that we look at are monogenic diseases, so have a genetic basis.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've learned over and over again is that if you solve the problem for some of these rare diseases and you understand the biology and the mechanism of actions, there's always this ability to translate those learnings into more common indications. I mean, the classic is statin. It came from a study of a rare disease, cholesterol and hypercholesterolemia. And we have other evidence, and one of the ones that we're working on is a rare disease called Gaucher's disease, for which many of us spent a lot of years trying to find a solution, and we did. And studying that biology of that particular indication will let us understand that mutations in the gene that's associated with this particular rare disease has significant implications in Parkinson's. And we're talking about a subset of Parkinson's, but we're still talking about 100,000 patients in the PD community. So those are the types of thinking that we do. We invest in diseases where there are, you would call it in the higher patient numbers, but we also look at ultra rare diseases, particularly if there's opportunities for us to leverage learnings from those types of investments for the future in terms of how we can apply it for more common indications. So that's really how we think about it, Jerry.
And can I just build on that? Because you also made me think of something, because the other way around is also true, right? So we might be pursuing a drug target for a broad disease, and then the science actually takes us towards a rare disease. And this ability to be able to see through the science, I think to me that's priceless. And this is where we should all be committing as a community, is just to follow the science. And I always like to give the example of spesolimab, one of our therapies now that is marketed under Spevigo for the treatment of GPP. We were actually pursuing that for psoriasis, which is a common disease. And then the science took us towards generalized pustular psoriasis, which is a very rare disease. And we followed the science. And I think the data speaks for itself. When you follow the science, the data speaks for itself. So this commitment to seeing through the science, I think, is essential for success. Thank you.
Well, we are perfectly on time to now, I think, invite a few questions from the audience. Are there any questions from the audience? I see one right here.
Yes.
You can just throw it at her.
Thank you. And thank you for this insightful discussion. I know we're going to discuss women's health later on today, but I'd really like to hear from you, your perspective. I'm Shelley Amster, and I started my career here at Yale as the first IVF lab director, so I'm thrilled to be here, invited by the chairman of the department. And I'm launching a company to deliver drugs safer, better, quicker into the uterus. And our first product is a non-hormonal copper IUD. We've addressed all the barriers around pain. And yet pharma and big biotech seem to be getting rid of their commitment to women's health or narrowing their focus. And we're the largest population. And I'm looking at a panel, and we have one woman. I mean, really, but at least in this room, there's a lot of women, and we all want to know that big pharma is going to step up. Can you help us discuss this?
Let's go first here. Say.
I can chime in to help out. Yeah, I have to disagree with you that large pharma is not investing in women's health. When we invest in autoimmune diseases, the majority of patients in autoimmune diseases are actually women. We are primarily catering for women there. We have a huge commitment to that. In addition to diseases, where you mentioned the uterus, endometriosis is also an area where I think there's an unmet need and where there are companies investing there. Yeah. So I have to disagree with this. Now, with regards to the diversity of the panel, I think diversity comes in many different ways, and we're seeing some of it also here. So I'm actually proud to be part with the set of gentlemen who are really experts in their field. So
I wasn't even supposed to be on this panel. I just want to remind you.
we just added him.
And I'll just add, if you look at the leadership at AstraZeneca, 4 of our senior leadership in science are women. And I would say in the leadership within Alexion, again, I would say more than 50%, 60% are women. So I think in that context, there's representation in terms of what you're worried about. I think there is a voice.
Women's health.
I know that immunology, but things that only affect women, from early contraception to abnormal bleeding,
Yep.
to menopause, to infertility,
Yep.
even the cancers that only affect women.
Yeah, breast cancer, I mean, the majority of it affects women. I mean, that's a big focus area for many companies, you know.
Yeah, I mean, Arvinis, our lead compound, vepdegestrant, where we'll have pivotal data at the end of this year, is for metastatic breast cancer. And our company's been focused on that almost from the beginning of its existence.
Yeah, but I do agree, you know, maybe the area of infertility isn't as much of an area of focus because there are hormonal therapies and others.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a renewed interest now in the field, like I said, of endometriosis. We're seeing more companies actually invest in that, and hopefully that encourages others to do that as well.
Thank you for your question. Any other
So-
questions? Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, right over here. Thanks, everybody, for your contributions there. Public policy is another big area that impacts this whole life science space. One of the debates right now in DC is about the issue of Biosecurity Act. It seems to get a lot of, right now, bipartisan support. It's an ongoing discussion, and there's obviously political aspects to it, but there's practical aspects. So some of the larger companies, obviously you got research that goes on outside of the US and China in particular, because this is where it seems to target it. What are your thoughts on the potential that this passes, and then how are you starting to think about managing that issue?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, certainly at Arvinis, we have had a lot of our chemistry done in China through CROs there, and in particular WuXi. And over the last several months, we've had to assess the potential impact of what could be almost a complete ban on working with Chinese groups. And what you do there is there's the obvious, which is what can you do internally? So we've been looking at that and the local community, and also other countries like India. But it's clearly a significant issue. When you see politicians who very rarely agree on anything, agreeing on this, and then it could end up being something that's quite significant. WuXi as a company is so heavily involved with so many companies though. I mean, lots and lots of things get done at WuXi. So that will be quite a dramatic impact if that actually occurs. But I know some big pharma companies are already moving away from China. And smaller companies that maybe have less flexibility are getting forced to look at that. So I think it's going to be quite significant, that change, if and when it occurs.
Mm-hmm.
Anything from BI and yeah.
Yeah, and I would first of all, I would start by saying that the biosecurity is a very important topic for everyone here, and you know that's not negotiable, right? We have to all commit to the biosecurity in the United States. But I think as far as impact, there's no question about it. It's going to have impact in whether you're a large farm and I think the worst impact will actually be on the smaller companies that are really banking on this one resource to manufacture, etc. Where we are working now, we're working with organizations like bio or pharma to lobby around these topics and to try to work around essentially grandfathering some of the existing contracts that we already have to prolong the time until when the government actually executes on this Biosecure Act, and that gives us a little bit of leeway to find alternative solution and help smaller companies find a way forward in the meantime. It's going to have a big impact. There's no question about it. So I would say.
Saying from the Alexion perspective?
Huge problem,
Yeah.
but from AstraZeneca's perspective, I will speak in that regard. We think it's manageable. and everyone, as you indicated, are making provisions to try and reduce the risk and exposure. But I would say AstraZeneca's position is actually very bullish. We're actually going to double down investment in China. And the reason why is because of innovation that country is actually well positioned to actually deliver. And you notice some of the transactions that the company has made in that space very recently. And if you've not had the opportunity to visit, which I did, I was really, really incredibly impressed with the state of biopharma in China. So to completely ignore it and to avoid it, I think is a mistake, not only for the industry, but also for our country's wealth and well-being. So I think it's something that we need to petition and campaign and educate and lobby for all the reasons that we said. But I think it's something that we cannot and should not divorce. It's just my personal opinion now.
Yeah, especially AstraZeneca being the #1 multinational in China. So it's very. I'm really glad you asked the question. I'll just kind of close out on this topic, which is just from a more macro view. I've been traveling China for 15 years for Goldman Sachs, so that innovation economy actually really became quite large with the Chapter 18A regime in Hong Kong that allowed for a lot of those biotechs to go public. Biosecure, to your good point, John, it really does not seem like a partisan issue. Meaning, it's moving forward whether we have a blue or red person in the White House in the fall. And so it's just something that has rippled through not just large cap, but mid cap and small cap biotech and pharma, period. So everyone is thinking about supply chain because the companies that John named, but even beyond, they are in many ways kind of intrinsically intertwined with US biotech on the research and development side. So it's a really, really challenging question that we'll have to continue to monitor that continues to, in my perspective, create a lot of noise, and in many ways will create deadweight loss for society because it's really creating friction in kind of deglobalizing what should be a global industry, right? Medicines are for everyone, right? They're not just for Americans or for Chinese people, or they're for everyone in society. So it's something, I'm really glad you asked the question. It's something that we're going to closely watch. I'm going to close out the panel with a quick lightning round. I didn't share this question with you in advance because I just came up with it. And so I would like to hear from each of you, important science question, your favorite food or restaurant in New Haven. John Houston.
Oh my God.
Well, it has to be bar, right?
That's such a leading question for John. What's your favorite pizza there? I don't know.
Yeah, it could be the Arvinus pizza.
Maybe the Arvinus pizza. Okay, fine. Karina?
Adriana, because it's named after my daughter.
Excellent.
I've only been here, this is my first time in New Haven, and I've only eaten at one restaurant at the hotel I'm staying at, so I'm going to have to, by default, say that's
it. Yeah.
Wait, what was the restaurant?
I don't even know the name.
Wow. It's got to be good.
It's the one at the Omni, like on the top.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Davenport's.
Davenport's, yeah.
That's not really a top 10 restaurant.
no.
That's quite sad.
But it's my top.
Yeah.
That's quite sad. Shang?
So for me, the last 10 months, I put on 15 pounds because I'm eating all the student food that's available close by to where I stay. But my favorite restaurant is actually Olier.
Oh, that's excellent. That's right next to Atticus. I will highlight, for those that are coming from outside of Connecticut or New Haven, aside from bar pizza, you should certainly check out Sally's Pepe's and Modern. If you don't like pizza, please leave. But if you don't like pizza, I had Louis' lunch twice this week, which is amazing. It's where, and I saw this 100 years ago when the hamburger was invented. And then there's also great Italian in New Haven. So on behalf of Josh and Morag and our panelists, we thank you again for the time today. Hopefully you've heard a lot of passion around New Haven and the Connecticut biotech ecosystem. So